I'd when hearts find freedom behind bars. The metal detector beeped as Officer Sarah Chen walked through the security checkpoint for what felt like the 1,000th time in her 3-year career at Riverside Women's Correctional Facility. But that morning was different. That morning she carried a weight in her chest that had nothing to do with the badge on her uniform or the keys jangling at her hip. It was the kind of weight that comes from lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering when exactly everything she thought she knew about herself had begun to unravel. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she made her way down the familiar corridor, her boots echoing against the linoleum floor, each step taking her closer to the woman who had somehow become both her greatest torment and her most unexpected salvation. She had spent the entire weekend trying to convince herself that what she felt was nothing more than misplaced compassion, that the way her heart raced when she saw Maya Rodriguez was simply the natural human response to witnessing someone suffering. But deep down, in a place she had been too afraid to examine until now, Sarah knew the truth. She had fallen in love with an inmate, and that truth was about to destroy everything she had built. Maya had arrived at Riverside 6 months earlier, a ghost of a woman with hollow eyes and a 5-year sentence for a crime born from desperation rather than malice. She had been caught in a drug trafficking operation, a single mother trying to pay for her daughter's medical treatments after her insurance company denied coverage for the 3rd time. The judge had been sympathetic but bound by mandatory minimum sentencing laws. Maya's daughter Elena had been placed with foster care, and Maya had entered the prison system with nothing left, except a photograph she kept hidden beneath her mattress and a heart that had stopped believing in second chances. Sarah had noticed her immediately during intake processing, not because Maya was particularly striking in appearance, but because of the profound sadness that seemed to emanate from her like a physical force. While other inmates shouted or cried or bargained, Maya had simply stood there in silence, her dark eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the concrete walls, as if she had already left her body behind and sent her soul somewhere safer. The prison had a way of grinding people down to their most basic elements. Sarah had seen it happen countless times. Women who arrived angry became numb. Women who arrived hopeful became bitter. But Maya seemed to exist in a different category altogether. She was unfailingly polite, quietly efficient in her assigned duties in the prison library, and completely isolated from the social hierarchies that governed inmate life. She didn't seek protection from any of the established groups. She didn't participate in the gossip or the petty dramas that erupted regularly in the common areas. She simply moved through her days like a woman walking through water, her movements slow and deliberate, as if the weight of her circumstances had fundamentally altered the way gravity affected her body. Sarah found herself watching Maya more than was professionally appropriate, initially telling herself she was simply monitoring a potential suicide risk, but gradually admitting that her attention had nothing to do with security, protocols and everything, to do with a pull she couldn't name. It started with small kindnesses that Sarah convinced herself were part of her duty. An extra blanket when the heating system failed in February, a blind eye turned when Maya spent an additional 15 minutes in the library after hours, desperate to finish a book that transported her somewhere beyond the walls, a recommendation for a job assignment that would keep Maya away from the more volatile inmates. But kindness evolved into conversation. During library duty one afternoon, when Sarah found Maya crying silently over a letter from Elena's foster mother, the letter contained a child's drawing of a house with 3 stick figures, 2 tall and 1 small with a sun in the corner and flowers along the bottom. Maya's daughter had drawn her new family, and Maya was not in the picture. Sarah had sat down across from Maya that day, breaking every rule about maintaining professional distance, and said something she would replay in her mind 1,000 times afterward. She had told Maya that her daughter would remember her, that children don't forget the people who loved them first, that this separation was temporary and love had a way of surviving even the cruelest circumstances. Maya had looked up at her then, really looked at her for the first time, and Sarah had felt something shift in the atmosphere between them. It was like the moment before lightning strikes, when the air becomes charged with electricity and every nerve in your body stands at attention. Maya had whispered thank you in a voice rough with disuse, and Sarah had seen something flicker behind those sad eyes, something that looked like the faintest possibility of hope. From that day forward, their interactions changed. Maya began to smile occasionally when Sarah passed her cell during evening rounds. Sarah began to time her breaks to coincide with library hours. They talked about books initially, safe territory that allowed them to share thoughts and feelings without crossing obvious lines. Maya loved poetry, especially the works of women who had written about confinement and liberation. Sarah had never been particularly literary, but she found herself checking out volumes of Emily Dickinson and Sylvia Plath, trying to understand the world through Maya's eyes. The conversations deepened gradually, the way roots grow through soil, slowly but with unstoppable determination. Maya talked about her life before prison, about working 3 jobs to support Elena after her husband left them, about the impossible choice between watching her daughter suffer or breaking a law she had never imagined herself capable of breaking. Sarah talked about growing up as the daughter of immigrants who had sacrificed everything for her education, about the pressure she felt to be perfect, to never disappoint, to build a life that would justify their struggles. She talked about her engagement to Marcus, a good man she had known since college, a man she respected, but didn't love the way the movies and songs suggested she should. She had convinced herself that the absence of passion was simply maturity, that real adult love was about compatibility and shared values, rather than electric connection. But with Maya, she felt everything the poets had promised and she had stopped believing in. Her hands trembled when they accidentally brushed against each other. Her chest ached when she went home at night, counting the hours until her next shift. She memorized the exact shade of brown in Maya's eyes and the way her rare smiles transformed her entire face. The moment Sarah admitted to herself that this was love came during a prison-wide lockdown following a fight in the cafeteria. Sarah had been assigned to check each cell, ensuring inmates were secure and unharmed. When she reached Maya's cell, she found her sitting on her bunk, arms wrapped around her knees, visibly shaking. The lockdown had triggered something in Maya, some memory or fear that had broken through her usual composure. Without thinking, Sarah had stepped into the cell and sat beside her, placing a hand on Maya's shoulder in a gesture that crossed every professional boundary she had sworn to maintain. Maya had turned into her embrace, burying her face against Sarah's shoulder, and Sarah had held her while she cried, feeling Maya's tears soak through the fabric of her uniform. They sat like that for what might have been minutes or might have been hours, time losing all meaning in the cocoon of their connection. When Maya finally pulled away, she looked at Sarah with an expression of such raw vulnerability and longing that Sarah felt her entire world reorganize itself. Around this moment, she leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and kissed Maya with a tenderness that contained all the words she could never safely speak aloud. The kiss lasted only seconds before the reality of where they were crashed back over them. Sarah pulled away, horror flooding through her as she realized what she had done. She stood abruptly, stumbling backward, her mind racing through the catastrophic consequences of her actions. She could lose her job. Maya could be transferred or punished. They could both face charges. But even as panic seized her, she couldn't bring herself to regret those few seconds when everything in the world had finally made sense. She left the cell without speaking, her legs carrying her on autopilot through the rest of her rounds, her mind replaying the softness of Maya's lips and the way her breath had caught. That night, Sarah sat in her car in the prison parking lot for 2 hours. After her shift ended, too paralyzed by confusion and fear to drive home, she thought about Marcus waiting for her with takeout and wedding magazines. She thought about her parents' expectations. She thought about the career she had worked so hard to build. But mostly she thought about Maya and the impossibility of what she felt. She avoided the library for the next week, requesting different assignments, taking different routes through the facility, doing everything possible to minimize contact, but avoidance only intensified the ache. Sarah found herself unable to sleep, unable to eat, unable to think about anything except the woman locked behind bars who had somehow unlocked something in Sarah's heart she hadn't known existed. She broke off her engagement to Marcus, unable to continue living a lie even if the truth remained unspoken. She saw the hurt in his eyes when she returned his ring, saw the questions he was kind enough not to ask. and felt like the worst kind of person for being unable to love him the way he deserved. She told him simply that she had realized she wasn't ready for marriage, that she needed to figure out who she was before she could promise herself to someone else. It was the closest she could come to honesty without destroying both their lives with the complete truth. Maya, meanwhile, was spiraling. Sarah heard from other officers that she had stopped eating regularly, stopped participating in her library duties with the same quiet efficiency. One of the counselors mentioned that Maya had requested additional sessions, that she seemed to be struggling with depression more severely than usual. Sarah knew she should stay away, knew that any attempt to help would only make things worse, but love has never been particularly good at listening to logic. She returned to the library one afternoon when she knew Maya would be there alone, reshelving books during the period between lunch and afternoon count. They stared at each other across the room, an entire conversation happening in the silence. Sarah walked toward her slowly, each step feeling like moving through concrete, until they stood facing each other between the shelves of forgotten novels. Maya spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper, asking Sarah why she had stayed away, whether the kiss had been a mistake, whether Sarah regretted it. Sarah's response came from somewhere deep and true, a place beyond fear or professional obligation. She told Maya that she had never regretted anything less in her entire life, that the kiss had been the most honest moment she had ever experienced, that she was terrified because she had fallen in love with someone she could never be with in any way that the world would accept or allow. Maya's eyes filled with tears as she confessed that loving Sarah was the first time she had felt alive since before her arrest, that even knowing nothing could come of it. She couldn't regret the way Sarah had given her a reason to believe in beauty again. They made a pact in that moment, spoken in hushed tones between the stacks of books about worlds neither of them would ever inhabit. They would allow themselves this connection within the strict boundaries of what was possible. They would talk during library hours. They would share thoughts and feelings through the safe medium of recommended readings. They would sustain each other through the impossible circumstances that kept them apart. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough. But it was what they had, and they would make it matter. The months that followed were marked by a kind of exquisite pain that Sarah had never imagined possible. Every conversation with Maya felt like both a gift and a wound. They found ways to communicate that wouldn't raise suspicion. Sarah would leave certain books on the return cart, marked with bookmarks on pages containing passages she wanted Maya to read. Maya would respond with her own selections, creating a dialogue in borrowed words from long dead authors who seemed to understand their impossible situation better than anyone living could. They learned each other's histories in fragments, building complete pictures from carefully shared pieces. Sarah learned that Maya had wanted to be a teacher before Elena was born, that she could speak 3 languages, that she had a scar on her left shoulder from a childhood accident involving a tree in her brother's dare. Maya learned that Sarah had played violin until a wrist injury in high school ended her musical aspirations, that she loved thunderstorms and hated surprises, that she had never felt comfortable in her own skin, until the moment she admitted to herself who she really was. The prison grapevine eventually picked up on their connection. Because prison walls have eyes and ears that miss nothing, rumors began to circulate. Whispered conversations that stopped when Sarah entered a room, knowing looks from inmates who trafficked in information currency. Sarah's supervisor called her in one afternoon, asking pointed questions about her interactions with inmate Rodriguez, reminding her of the strict fraternization policies, warning her that even the appearance of impropriety could end her career. Sarah maintained her composure, insisting that her interactions with Maya were entirely professional, that she treated all inmates with the same human dignity, that any rumors were the product of bored people looking for drama where none existed. But the warning served its purpose. Sarah became even more careful, more circumspect, pulling back even further from the little contact they had allowed themselves. The distance was necessary for survival, but it felt like dying slowly. Maya's release date approached with the terrible inevitability of all endings. She had served 4 years of her 5-year sentence, earning early release for good behavior and participation in educational programs. Sarah tried to be happy for her, tried to focus on the fact that Maya would be reunited with Elena, Now 8 years old and living with an aunt who had agreed to take custody once, Maya was released. But happiness was complicated by the knowledge that freedom for Maya meant losing whatever fragile connection they had maintained. On the outside, they couldn't speak. On the outside, Sarah was still a corrections officer and Maya would still be on parole, and any contact between them would violate the terms of her release and cost Sarah her career. They would have to become strangers, and that reality felt more confining than any cell. The night before Maya's release, Sarah broke protocol one final time. She volunteered for the late shift, timing her rounds so she could stop at Maya's cell during the quiet hours when most of the facility slept. Maya was awake, sitting on her bunk, her few possessions already packed in the clear plastic bag the prison provided. They looked at each other through the bars, and Sarah felt her heart breaking in slow motion. She told Maya that she would think about her every day, that she would hope for her happiness even though they couldn't share it, that loving her had changed Sarah in ways she was only beginning to understand. Maya pressed her palm against the bars, and Sarah matched it from the other side, as close to touching as the circumstances would allow. Maya told Sarah that she owed her everything, that Sarah had reminded her what it meant to be human when the system was designed to make her forget, that she would carry the memory of their connection like a light inside her chest, warm enough to guide her through whatever came next. If this story has touched your heart in any way, if you believe that love can bloom in the most unexpected places, that hope can survive even in darkness, and that human connection transcends all the barriers we build between each other, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to believe in the power of authentic love, and subscribe to this channel for more stories that celebrate the beautiful complexity of the human heart. Your support helps us continue sharing these emotional journeys that remind us all of our shared humanity. Maya walked out of Riverside Women's Correctional Facility on a bright Tuesday morning in May, carrying her plastic bag of possessions and wearing donated clothes that didn't quite fit. Sarah watched from a window in the administrative building, hidden where Maya wouldn't see her, tears streaming down her face as the woman she loved walked through the gates toward freedom. Elena was waiting in the parking lot with her aunt, and Sarah watched as mother and daughter collided in an embrace that justified every sacrifice Maya had made. She watched Maya kneel down to hold Elena's face in her hands, watched her cry and laugh simultaneously, watched her begin the process of rebuilding a life from ruins. And even though Sarah's heart felt like it was being torn from her chest, she smiled through her tears because Maya was free, and that mattered more than anything else. Sarah quit her job at Riverside 2 months later. She told herself it was because she needed a fresh start, because she had accomplished what she set out to do and it was time for new challenges. But the truth was simpler and more complicated than that. She couldn't walk those corridors anymore without seeing Maya in every corner, without remembering conversations between bookshelves and stolen moments that had to sustain her through impossible loneliness. She enrolled in a graduate program in social work, determined to help people in ways that didn't require her to lock them away from the world. She started attending a support group for LGBTQ individuals, finally giving herself permission to explore the identity she had suppressed for so long. If you've stayed with this story until now, if it made you feel something real, please take a moment to comment below and tell us. Do you believe love can change us for the better, even when it can't last forever? 3 years passed. Sarah built a new life, one that felt more authentically hers than anything she had known before. She dated occasionally, met good people, learned to be comfortable in spaces she had previously avoided. But she never forgot Maya, never stopped wondering what had become of her, never stopped hoping that she had found happiness with her daughter, that she had built something beautiful from the wreckage of her past. Sarah had accepted that some loves are meant to transform us rather than last forever, that Maya had been the catalyst that helped her become who she was always meant to be. And that was enough. It had to be enough. Then one afternoon in September, Sarah walked into a coffee shop near the university, where she now worked as a counselor for formerly incarcerated individuals trying to rebuild their lives. She ordered her usual cap,